All right. Hi, Nicole. I'm really grateful that we're doing this conversation about intuition and disregarding intuition and why and how that happens. And I um I guess I'll start by introducing myself. Folks in my audience know me and folks in your audience know you, but men don't know each other necessarily. Um, so my name's Mark Silver, and I'm the founder of Heart of Business. I've been doing um, work in business, helping people develop businesses that they can count on to support them for the last 24 years. And I've
Mhm.
been doing it at this intersection of spiritual connection and so awareness of social justice and systemic injustices and business, small, tiny businesses, heart centered businesses. And my spiritual background that makes me interested in this topic is that I've been practicing in a Sufi Islamic spiritual lineage for about as long, actually a little longer than I've had the business. And I'm a designated master teacher. I have my master's of divinity. I've studied deeply with my teachers, and a lot of the work that we do at Heart of Business has to do with listening to the heart, with receiving guidance, with um, learning to trust something deeper, to trusting our connection with love on the
Mhm.
path. And it's challenging. It's not always easy or straightforward. And there's a lot of things to unwind there. And so when I saw you talking about disregarding intuition or ignoring it or missing it, I'm like, oh, I wanna talk to you. Um, and I have some thoughts about it, of course. And so, anyway, so that's kind of where I'm standing and coming from. And want to
Thank you,
hand it
Anna.
over to you.
Sounds beautiful. So I'm Nicole Drummond. I work as an intuitive healer. That's kind of the name I've given myself. And my background is started with shiatsu, went into EFT, hypnosis, NLP, and what else? A bit of Reiki. And then I eventually just got to a point where I realized I was like, oh, I'm a channel. Okay, what if I just drop into that and I start working with energy, mind, consciousness on that level? And that's where my work kind of moved into. And so, in terms of who I work with, I've got kind of a bit of an intersection where I'm working with highly sensitive people who are struggling with healthy boundaries and working with anxiety issues. But I'm also working with people who are trying to realize what I'm terming their soul mission. So they have a sense that there's a job they're meant to be doing, but they're not quite sure how to get there. And sometimes there's clearing on different levels to help them with mindset, belief, and listening to their intuition to figure that out. And then there's intuitive mentoring as well. So I do that on a one-to-one, and now it's starting to open out into intuitive training. So
Mm,
yeah, so my path has really been about, yeah, and just because you've mentioned your spiritual path, I was with the Buddhist tradition, Triratna, for about 12 years, and just recently I came out of the ordination process. So there's a bit of a flow and a question mark around, it's like, oh, what am I now? But that's given me this amazing grounding in ethics and, well, I was about to say compassion, but it's something I work with every day. But yeah, it was also when my business started, when I was doing my shiatsu training, I also started going to the Buddhist center. So there was this real merging of what was, I guess, more shamanic, really, in an energetic sense of connecting with consciousness, and then also, learning how to live in a way that felt in alignment ethically. So yeah.
mm, that's beautiful. Thank you. So I'm curious. I want to invite you to kind of start off the conversation, if you will. And the only thing I want to do to kind of key it up in a way is um, the topic is interesting to me because, man, times are tumultuous. And probably people who live in every time say that, but now that we can see things on a global level, this last generation, or so, It's like we're aware of disruption at a very widespread level. And oh, and here's my dog wanting to come in. Come on in, Rocky. And now you want to go out. He comes in from my outer door and then goes through the office and back
Cool.
downstairs. Anyway, he knows what he wants. Um, and so we're aware of this disruption. And then even just on a daily basis, like because I work with people who are developing businesses and they're like some very key needs, like very survival level needs and key self-worth needs are bound up, it can be very hard to trust little intuitive
Mm,
nudges, or when you're asking direct questions to feel like you're hearing a direct answer because of the stakes. And
mm.
so anyway, so I mean this is why this conversation is interesting to me, especially in these times. And so anyway, I'm curious to hear your take on it. And
Okay.
yeah.
So, so there's a question about listening to the intuitive voice when the stakes are high. That was, and then it's like, what was the other one? Like knowing whether you should follow it. I forget now. There's another.
Yeah, yeah, well, and wasn't necessarily specific question, but more of kind of like a context for
Yeah.
why, at least folks in my audience, why it comes up a
Yeah.
lot.
Um, I think I always reflect back on my own experience, and I think I've always been someone that when there's a niggle where I'm like, this doesn't quite feel in alignment, this doesn't quite feel right, I can't just live with it. It gets louder and louder and louder, until I have to make a move in whatever direction it is. So I think by nature, that intuitive voice can just keep building until I take action. Um, and I've started to learn to listen to it quicker because where it actually takes me is into a slipstream of, instead of feeling like I'm raking water uphill with some activity that I'm trying to engage in, or a strategy that I'm trying to push forward with my work, my courses. Instead, it's I have to take a slower route, which can feel like a slower route, but with knowing that actually there's going to be more traction when I have faith and follow the course. But it does take, you have to kind of hold your breath at times. And not that long ago, I had my shiatsu practice. I come out of maternity leave, and I said to my husband, I can't do this anymore, and I've got to change tack. And he's like, "Are you crazy? We need the money. We need it now." And you've got these clients. What are you doing? And I'm just like, "Just trust me." And he's like, "But what are you doing?" And I'm like, "I don't know, but just trust me." And it was just like, and then I started doing my EFT business, and then financially where he wanted me, to be at within a year I was there. And he was like, wow, okay, you've got flexibility, you're earning more money, you're really happy. And then he was just like, okay, what, each time now we do a check-in, and he's like, what does your intuition say? And he's like, I trust you, because the evidence has been proving itself along the way. I'm like, the voice says this, I don't have all the information yet, but just trust me. So it does take faith of those around us. And it's like it's a sensitive place to be, a vulnerable place, because I can't just dish up a 5-year business plan and say, right, bang, this is where I'm going. It's like I've got to take it incrementally, because there's going to be these synchronicities, there's going to be these conversations, there's going to be these shifts internally that happen.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, with this business currently, it was like, okay, so I've just got to stay open and see who comes, see who
Yeah.
comes. And then the niche started to register. I was like, okay, this is it. And then, but again, my intuition was like, highly sensitive people isn't all of it. And I was like, what are you saying? Why can't I just, I've got people wanting to talk to me about boundaries. Why can't I'll just deliver a course on boundaries. And then every time I checked in, it was like, no, it's just
Right.
not where you're meant to go. So I was like, I could have built a whole strategy around that, but I just knew that the energy was just kicking out of me. So
So
again,
this is the piece that I think is so interesting. The part that I'm hearing is when you say, well, this is my intuition and my intuition said this or my guidance said this, and I think like where I'm seeing people struggle is like, well, how do I know?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of different messages we get, including like, I just want to hide under my covers. So, it's like, or, oh, if you do like, or even like, how do you know that it's your guidance and like that your husband wasn't having the intuition? Like, what are you crazy? Like, we need the money. Like, why isn't that the voice of intuition? Do you know? So it's like,
I mean, predominantly it's practice. You know, there was a point at which within in my mid-20s, and I went through a breakup, and my head was saying, we can fix this, we can make it work. You know, it was like 5 years in, and my heart was going, no, I love him, don't leave. And then my gut, for me in that instance, I feel it in different places. And, you know, we
mhm,
have it coming through it, you know, some of us are really heart-based, and others it's like a tingle, some of us it's a hunch, you know, some of us call it instinct. And anyway, for me in that moment it was this gut, no, no marriage, no buying a house, no kids. And I was like, I couldn't go against that physical feeling. But I've known people that
mhm,
have, and then they get married, and that someone I knew the next day called it all off and then got a divorce because they just didn't want to listen, you know, pressures and everything. But in at that point, I was like, well, what is this mysterious thing, my intuition, that seems to have a better understanding of what's coming along than I do? I might as well go to that part of me because that's clearly the captain, rather
mhm,
than relying on these two things. So it's like you've got to be able to learn. I just started making that my first port of call. And this is like day-to-day activities, whether it's planning my diary,
mhm.
planning which friend I'm going to see on what month, or, you know, is that client going to turn up? You know, even we had a issue like with our timing today, and my there was a part of me kept telling me it's not going to happen, and I was like, but we've got it in the diary. And then it became clear. I was like, oh, it's, you know, there was a misalignment around time. So yeah, so the day-to-day things, you know, around, oh, should I start this now or not?
Mhm,
Sorry, I'm like thinking about, should I switch my website to this provider and those things, and then, you know, picking
mhm.
a niche. It's like you just start to practice it day to day, like you're in town and you think, should I go this way or that way? And then just follow it, you know. So you start to empower it, you start to
Mhm.
practice it. It's both a relationship and a muscle, because then you start to trust it more and more.
Right.
And also you need to, you know, for me, obviously I'm a therapist, but as a highly sensitive, I was just like, I need to have support regularly. I need to have something in the diary once every couple of weeks where I'm just clearing out, going deeper. And so I need to be a really clear vessel. So I know my triggers. I know when something's mine or not mine. I've got a really good filtering system now. So you kind of, but even then, I've got someone that channels for me every kind of 6 months. She's like my business channel, just because
Mhm.
I'll be like, I'm doing it all on my own and I'm holding it all in my own head. And I just want
It's
someone.
good to have those reflections. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like you're on the right track. And she's been doing that for me for, you know, last 3 years. And it's just been so valuable. So
Mhm.
even when you're a channel and that's what you do, I still want someone to, you know, just say, okay, this is what I'm thinking, and to go, absolutely yes. And it just makes me feel better, you know? So, or
Yeah, I do. Well, I
confirming.
mean, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to
No, no,
cut you
that's
off.
it.
Yeah. Well, I'm just echoing a lot of what you're saying here because when I first started studying with my Sufi teachers, the very first thing that we started to work on and then spent 3 years working on is discerning the different voices within, like discerning the discernment of like, what are you listening to and what, and how is it, how are they entangled with each other and how do they mimic, you
Yeah.
know, and mimic and then subtly distort so that it sounds, and so it's been a very interesting journey for me when I think about those high stake decisions and guidance. The way that I experience it is that the guidance will sometimes be clear in the way that you're saying, that if I just slow down and go,
Mm,
well, duh, like this morning, we're in a bit of a drought situation in our area, and we recently planted a grapevine and a mulberry tree.
mm,
And I just was like, oh, I'm tired. I don't want to, but I heard like, you got to they need water. You have to go do it. And I'm like, okay, that's what we're doing. We're going to water these. And and I did that, and I could feel my whole system relax as I kind of went into that flow. Other times, I would say it's the same thing, but it's like it brings in a level of complexity or discernment. So my personality often wants there to be kind of a black and white, like this is right and this is wrong.
Mm.
And sometimes what happens is I start to sense something, or I'm working with a client, they're starting to sense something, and they're like, wow, this seems like a really good idea, but I'm getting a no. And what I'm often encouraging myself or others to do is like, well, lean into it. Like, what's really here? Because sometimes it's an absolute no and you turn away from it. And sometimes it just needs to be in a different form. Like our misalignment today was like, oh, that's not happening, but happening an hour later. And it's a really easy shift. And I've seen people go through really deep healing just by, oh, I can have my needs met, or I can stand up for what I want, or I can be in alignment with my heart, but still show up in the situation. And then suddenly it's a yes instead of a no. And so that's a that for me is what has taken a lot of practice, because I do tend to go into polarity, you know? I think that there's different personalities, and me being sixth planet Virgo or whatever, it's like I'd like, and so
Yeah.
for me to be able to walk with more complexity and more nuance
Mm, mm,
has been a really deep practice. And I also want to echo this piece around the clutter clearing. Like I don't consider myself a highly sensitive person, and at at that level from what I've seen, in terms of how people operate. But I still need to clear my heart and space. I we have Sufi practices that I do every morning and throughout the day to kind of connect and to clear.
mm,
And in our community, and well, in our business community that we facilitate, once 6 times a year, every other month, we hold a 24-hour retreat,
mm.
um, to
Wow.
help people do just that, to just like like committed time for spiritual practice, for listening, for clearing. And I think that that is really underestimated a
Mm,
lot. I
yeah.
think that a lot of people, I think it's very easy in our culture to, and I'm speaking particularly living in the belly of the beast here in the United States, but I know that it's also a wider Western culture, this addiction to productivity and to
Mm,
making things happen. And that can really bleed into how we, I don't know, how I have taken on spiritual practice, like trying to do something with spiritual
mm,
practice. And sometimes that works, and sometimes it's appropriate, to bring a question or bring an intention or to bring some kind of movement to it. But more often, it's this embracing of the source of love,
mm, mm, mhm,
you know? One of the things that I've been very touched by in my practice, it's like so as an Islamic Sufi, I pray the 5 daily prayers,
mhm,
and the language is not, you don't go and pray. Like the language is make salah. And salah, which is often interpreted into English as prayer, actually means connection. And so it's
mm,
like go and make connection. So 5 times a day. I just sent out an article to our audience about the importance of being interrupted,
mm,
and that these prayers, these points of connection interrupt the busyness of the day. And I find that by having a practice of being interrupted by love,
mm,
it helps kind of build in, it helps in the moment. It helps for what it is, but it also helps that when I'm interrupted by something unexpected in my life, I've learned or clued into on a good day. I'm not a saying to mess up all the time, but it's like, but I like on a good day, an interruption is a cue to turn towards love instead
Mm.
of to get caught in the spin. And
Wow.
and I find that that's a very powerful reorientation practice for
Mm.
me in terms
Mm.
of the listening part, in terms of the listening and trusting part that you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, just to jump back to something you were saying before about the kind of duality piece or the black and white. I mean, I'm actually, I'm a woman, but my husband and I joke that, it kind of, it's not about gender, but I'm very yang in my way of being, and he is way more yin. So he teaches me to slow down, to soften, and whereas I'm like, what's the attack plan kind of thing? How can we fix this? So in that way, when information comes to me, I would, my guidance knows that I would sit down and make the 5 year plan, and I want to know what it is and who I'm helping and when it's happening. And so I've had to learn, it's like they just back off, and it's like, well, you're not the person you need to be yet. You've not had the realizations that you need to have. You've not had the learning you've needed to do through having a year's worth of clients, through going through that process. So it's like I've learned to trust that I can probably look 6 months ahead, and I get a lot of flashing images of what's to come. And I have, that comes in more and more, but I just trust and I trust. So it's not, I've got a similar kind of personality, and I guess in a way, in that sense of it's not just staying open and doing nothing. It's like getting a hint of something and then taking action where required. And then, it's this kind of continual flow between opening, trust, listening, activity, movement, and sometimes we do more or less depending. Um, so yeah, I'm definitely not, flying around in the woods, kind of like all the I do have long, flowy skirts on at times, but yeah. So it's and I think how we all connect in as well will be unique to us. So I have so many clients where they have a very strong connection to nature, and there's just messages that
Mm,
come through, and uh, yeah, it's really beautiful. And yeah, it's not always okay, I'm going to sit and meditate or whatever. It's like kind of learning, okay, for me it's ecstatic dance or movement, it comes through in different ways. So
yeah, it's beautiful.
mm.
There's something else I wanted to kind of touch on, which I think has been helpful because you said like you've learned how to like respond to this more and more quickly, like to be, less resistant and less hesitation
Mm.
before. And this is really interesting because one of the things that I've observed is that the more I do something, the better I get at it, right? I think this is normal for most things. And I find that exactly that, like the faster I can surrender, the more like I can do it more often. Like if I spend days resisting things or months or years, as I have, um, then that's only one cycle and it takes a very long time. Whereas if I'm surrendering, I had this retreat once where I was with my sheikh who had passed some years ago, but we were all in a group retreating all night. And in the middle of the night, I was having this experience where I would have different states come to me, and and as soon as I surrendered and embraced it, it changed. And I
Mm.
got the hang. And that happened 2 or 3 times, and then I realized like, oh, this is about surrendering into the state. And then they just started flashing really like this, just and I was just like learning the practice of surrender into what was coming. And it was a very deep teaching for me. And one more story related to this is that the first hint I got of this, there was a teacher on our path who, like so when we're gathered in a group of Sufis or Muslims or what have you, and and it's time for the prayer, somebody will make the call to prayer, make the adhan, and it interrupts. It does. People are sitting around talking, doing whatever, hanging out, and then all of a sudden the call breaks through everything. And so there have been times I've been asked to make the adhan, and I'm always like, I'm looking around. Is it okay? I'm going to interrupt people. I have to prepare and take a breath, and like there's all this, kind of like getting comfortable with that idea. But there was this one time that I saw our sheikh turn to this teacher who wasn't from the US. He grew up in another country in a Muslim culture, and very deep teacher. And he turned to him and said, "Make the adhan." And this teacher, without pause, like not even pausing to take a breath, launched out in this really loud call that interrupted everything.
Mm,
And there was such, for me, that went so deep for me. It's like, oh, can I have that kind of complete and immediate surrender when I'm shown something or asked something or given something? When you trust where it's coming from, of course. Part of the pause sometimes is the discernment, but that's not always true. Sometimes I know it's coming from the right place, but can I just like put my
yeah.
put my head down and leap, as it were? And I
Mm,
feel like that's been, my spiritual walking, the path I've been on is like trying to embrace a faster surrender.
mm. I think
Yeah.
what I'm thinking of is your, sorry, I'm
Mm,
interrupting.
um,
I was just thinking of how is that for me the concept of no self and opening up to its ego deaths, isn't it? So I think it feels like this great irony, but I feel like my business is this spiritual development process that I'm that actually, I my mind was like, oh, I should be in a retreat center and teaching in this way. And actually everything in me was like, no, I should be in the world teaching how people how to connect in this other way. And that is kind of my spiritual practice, I think. Yeah, I'm getting kind of tingles as I'm saying it. So there's um for me it's this connection when I talk about intuitive living, intuitive flow, and you kind of were referencing it there, I feel, but it's like I've got to get out of the way. So when I've got all of that fear coming up around, you know, before I could do this course that I started writing last year, suddenly there was this burst of fear around visibility, fear around groups, stuff that I didn't even know that was there. And to the point when I thought about writing it, I was shaking. I thought, this is crazy. So then I had to do this kind of personal development work for 2, 3 months before I could even sit down and write anything. So I think it's, when we're doing it, it can take us through these layers of self. And sometimes it's ancestral, and my worldview, past lives. So it's kind of like there can
mm,
be stuff that we have to go through to open up more and more to our potential. So,
yes.
we can get out of the survival state, say, but with some of my clients, trauma symptoms, and then as we're pushing against expansion, then we're just meeting these other new layers. So there can be this dual work that needs to happen to actually that kind of clearing out and letting go of these kind of this identity that we have to really, yeah, step into that bigger mission. And I remember from it was just making me think when I was a kid, and in the UK it was like Bible stories and stuff, and you'd have the saints sort of saying, "Oh no, no, I'm so terrified. Do not make me do this thing." And I remember thinking, "Oh God, it sounds so cool. You got these like giant angels coming along and like giving you this mission. Why are you resisting it?" And I mean, it's absolutely no, it's not equivocal at all. But it's like when, for me, this soul mission project came in, it just suddenly was like, okay, you're ready now. Here you go. Here's the thing. And then all this information started coming through. And I was just like, this just sounds like craziness. It's really, seriously, you want me to say this? And I'm not sure, this kind of unease around, they're like, no, this is what you signed up for. And it's like, really? So as we can have that kind of, yeah, resistance to what we should be doing as well, it doesn't always
Mhm.
feel comfortable, as well as needing to do that inner work. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't see for myself or for clients like anything wrong with the time it takes to integrate or get comfortable with what's coming in. I think for me, it's just a personal challenge of like, can I, can I surrender into that and let the comfort come while I'm walking rather than before I start, you know?
Also, it's an interesting, like one of my teachers said, if you're comfortable, you're not growing. And I think that there's a kind of, I think
Hmm.
there's a kind of, I think there's a comfort in being authentic and knowing yourself well enough and knowing who you are. But
Hmm.
then for me, there's an edge of expansion isn't comfortable. There's a lot of discomfort there. So it's kind of there can be an
Hmm.
interesting mix. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. The way the Sufis talk about it is we talk about layers of the heart, that
Mm,
there's the self and the heart and the soul and the secret, and that something that is comfortable for one layer will be uncomfortable for another layer. So that the self will be really uncomfortable at the thought of annihilation or complete change or this kind of expansiveness, whereas the heart or the soul, might be flying. And this especially happens when you're aware of the soul expansion.
mm,
And so this is like a and this is almost a little bit of what the nuance and the complexity I was talking about before is like, oh, there is this, like the discomfort, like when I'm aware of these layers, I can locate where the discomfort is, and that can be part of where the trust comes in. It's like, oh, myself is uncomfortable, but my heart is flying or my soul feels expansive. And so I can just know that. As opposed to whether my soul isn't, like there's something that's not quite clicked in and I'm like, oh, okay, this is worth pausing and listening to more deeply.
yeah.
So,
It kind of reminds me of something you said earlier around, you know, it's a no, but then we turn it a bit and then it's a yes kind of thing. And I think sometimes, like when I think about when I was trying to figure out my niche, and it was like, okay, yes-ish. It's kind of like it's stage one, but we can't show you the rest. Just do stage one first, yeah?
mhm,
Or it's yes, but not yet 5 years' time. Or it's like yes, but not in that format, this format, but do it in 6 months' time. Or so yeah, that can be it's like reading the nuance in that way as well to
mhm,
try and figure out
yes.
yeah what it means. Um yeah, and sometimes like that's that can be the thing I need help with. So the last time I got help, I was like, what is going on? I'm trying to figure out my diary. And energetically, all I could feel was it just kept doing this. And I was trying to pick the weekends where I was meant to run these courses. And Becca said, "Oh, you're able to tune into potentials. So each time you tune into one, all the rest of the weekends flip and change, and you tune into the next, then the weekends flip and change. But neither of those potentials are like dramatically different. So you can, land on one and pick it. I didn't know that that was a skill that I had. All I knew was that it was
Mm.
flipping around, and I was confused.
And
So yeah.
this is so important, and this is why I'm grateful to my lineage, and it sounds like you are too. With your teachers, is that it can be really hard to interpret these pieces because we don't have the frame. Like if I didn't have the understanding of the layers, if I wasn't taught the understanding of the layers of the heart, it would have been really hard to interpret what it was that my senses were telling me, and that's where we can really benefit from that kind of support.
And some
Well,
of it
yeah, go ahead.
Well, so some of it is trial and error,
Hmm.
it's okay to
Yes.
make mistakes. So
Yes.
it's like for me, I'll get a growl if some bit of me is responding to someone in a way that I don't trust them. I don't know why or what all the information is, but I've learned to just listen to it. But at one point, I was like, am I reacting because my buttons are being pushed, or is it
Right.
because there really is an issue, and that again is the inner clearing work. So but some of that is one time we listen and then we go, I was totally right, and another time we talk ourselves out of it and it's like, oh damn it, I knew. So
Right.
it's kind of
Right.
yeah, there is trial and error, and that's
Yeah, for sure.
the process. Yeah.
I love this. I kind of have this sense of wanting to bring this particular conversation to a close,
Mhm.
if you agree with that. And I just would love to hear if there's anything that's kind of like floating out that wants to be said that could be helpful to anyone who's listening to us kind of talk this through from two different perspectives.
Mm. All I'm hearing, I'm just like, is there a message? And I'm just hearing, just listen, just listen, just listen. It is coming back, and it's a different quality. It's not of the conscious mind that, particularly when we can start to enter into more alpha states of mind, that's when we can really get in touch with the higher self coming through with messages, or our guidance coming through with messages. So, we can do that in self hypnosis or meditation or walking in nature. It's like whatever your way, yeah, dropping into deeper states and then listening. So, yeah, that seems to be what's coming through.
It's beautiful. And for me, there was an insight that came through for me in that in the Sufi teachings is that, a lot of times we search for guidance because we want to know, we want to do the right things so we can be in the right place and the right thing can happen. And what really came through was like, this is not what guidance is about. Like, that we are given ignorance as human beings so that we will cling to love, and that the practice of receiving intuition and guidance is, yes, it can be helpful in living our lives, but that the deeper reason for it is to help us return to the spring of love over and over and over again until we learn to live there. And um and for me, that was such a deeply peaceful reorientation, so that I wasn't grasping for answers, but instead realizing, like, oh, my heart just needs to drink, and that the ignorance is just a reminder that I need to keep drinking.
Mm. Mm.
Mm. I so appreciate you in the world. I'm really glad we met and that you were open to me reaching out and having this conversation. I
Mm.
really hope it feeds people. We've both been working with this for quite some time, and I know a lot of people are tangled about it. And I think there's so much wisdom that can come when two different perspectives kind of create a tapestry that makes it easier for people to access because there's
Yeah.
a widening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, thank you so much. Yeah, I've really enjoyed exploring it with you.
Yeah. All right. Blessings and peace.